Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving deep today into the organizations that aren't just, building the future of AI. They're really defining its risks, its ethics. We're talking, of course, about the big three, OpenAI, DeepMind, and Anthropic.
Yeah, and what's fascinating is how these three labs, they each started with really distinct missions.
Hmm.
You had OpenAI initially focused on broad benefit, DeepMind on pure research, and Anthropic laser-focused on safety.
Right, different philosophies, different structures, at
Oh,
least initially.
exactly. But what our sources are showing us today is how these external forces, really, the intense competitive pressure of this AI race, it's acting like this powerful evolutionary force.
Pushing them all onto the same track, kind of blurring those lines.
Pretty much. It's forcing convergence, you could say. And that's really the core mission of this deep dive, right? To understand how their corporate structures, their internal thinking, is being rapidly reshaped by this pressure.
Yeah, we want to trace that fundamental tension that keeps coming up. Safety versus the speed of development. And we'll be using documents that show their corporate shifts, their big breakthroughs, but also, interestingly, some pretty sharp critiques of their major claims.
We've got some really revealing material, especially around the sheer economics of scaling these massive AI models. It makes you realize that sometimes the sheer instinct for corporate survival can just completely override the original ethical goals.
Absolutely. So maybe the clearest place to start is with that tension playing out at OpenAI and how that led directly to the birth of its safety-focused offshoot, Anthropic.
Yeah, to really get the scale of the shift, you have to go back to OpenAI's founding in 2015.
Yeah.
The sources, they lay out this original mission statement, and it was incredibly, well, altruistic.
How so?
It was set up as a pure nonprofit. The explicit goal was to benefit humanity as a whole.
Yeah.
And crucially, the structure was designed so it would operate unconstrained by a need to generate financial return.
Wow. So remove the profit motive entirely.
That was the idea. Engineer an altruistic outcome by design.
Which sounds perfect, right, for developing something potentially world-changing, maybe even dangerous. You could take your time, focus on safety, focus on the mission, not the bottom line.
That was the ideal, yeah. But then it just slammed headlong into the financial reality of this AI race.
It didn't last.
No. The sources confirm that by 2019, things had changed. Training the really big models, like GPT-3 back then, and just hiring the top talent, the compute costs alone were astronomical. Hundreds of millions of dollars.
And a pure nonprofit structure just couldn't raise that kind of money.
Exactly. It wasn't feasible. But they had to pivot.
And that's when they transitioned to this, what they called a capped profit structure, which sounds unusual. Can you break down what that actually means? Because it seems key to understanding the tension inside the organization.
Yeah, it's a really interesting setup. The capped profit model was basically their attempt to square the circle. How do you raise massive amounts of capital like they needed for Microsoft while trying to keep hold of that original safety mission?
So how does it work mechanically?
Okay, so investors like Microsoft, they put in billions, but their potential return is capped. Now, the cap mentioned in our materials could be like 100 times their investment, which is obviously huge.
100 times, that's still a massive incentive.
It's enormous, no question. But it is technically limited. And theoretically, the original nonprofit board was supposed to retain ultimate control over the mission, the ethics, and the really critical decisions about deploying whatever the profit-making side built.
So the nonprofit board holds the reins, in theory.
In theory. But the reason they made this shift was pretty stark. They explicitly said they needed the cash influx simply to keep up with better-funded rivals.
Like DeepMind, backed by Google.
Exactly. They realized without billions, they just couldn't compete for the hardware, the GPUs, the specialized engineers. They'd fall behind. The capped profit model was born out of that competitive necessity.
And it's that structural change, putting financial viability seemingly ahead of the pure nonprofit ideal that triggered the split, right? The founding of Anthropic.
Yes, precisely. Anthropic was formed in 2021 by a pretty significant group of researchers who left OpenAI, specifically those most focused on safety.
Why did they leave? What was the core disagreement?
They fundamentally disagreed with OpenAI's new direction. Their fear, as the sources detail, was that the commercial pressures baked into that capped profit model would inevitably compromise the commitment to slow, careful, safety-first AI research.
So they wanted to preserve that original spirit.
Their goal was absolutely to double down on safety, to make it the priority in a way they felt OpenAI was no longer structured to do.
It's a compelling story, isn't it? The rebels leaving the empire to kind of save the mission's soul. But here's the twist, the paradox that our sources really hammer home. Even Anthropic, founded specifically to prioritize safety above all else, eventually decided that commercialization was, quote, necessary.
It's maybe the most sobering lesson in the materials we looked at. Anthropic, just a couple of years after forming with this safety-first mandate, also went out and raised massive funding rounds from big tech companies like Amazon and Google.
But why? If safety was the goal, why jump back into the commercial fray?
It seems they hit the same wall. They realized you can't do cutting-edge safety research, especially on the most powerful frontier AI models, just by theorizing from the sidelines. That research itself requires huge computational resources.
So to make the most powerful systems safe, you first have to build the most powerful systems.
Apparently so. And building them costs billions. So to afford the safety research, they needed the commercial funding.
That feels almost like a trap.
Yeah.
They had to embrace the very competitive dynamic they were trying to escape just to fund the research into mitigating the risks of that dynamic.
It's a definite cycle. And by taking that funding and building their own large models, like Quad, they inevitably became another major player, adding fuel to the competitive fire they initially wanted to dampen.
Now, you mentioned researchers framing this not just as business competition, but as something more fundamental.
Yeah, the term used is evolutionary pressure. And it highlights a really profound systemic risk in this whole AI race. The forces shaping these companies, driving their structures and strategies, they align more with principles of natural selection, survival, growth, resource acquisition, than with carefully considered human values or safety.
That phrase, evolutionary pressure, is genuinely chilling. It implies that if safety requires moving slowly, and moving slowly means your company dies because a competitor moves faster and captures the market, then safety essentially becomes an evolutionary disadvantage, a trait that gets selected against.
That's exactly the fear. The AI race is described in some of the material as insidious, precisely because this selection process favors traits like scale, speed, and maximizing influence over caution, deliberation, or maybe even altruism.
And if all the big labs are locked in this survival game?
Then the sources suggest that the biggest risk becomes a coordination failure. The inability of these powerful actors to collectively agree to slow down, to prioritize shared safety protocols over individual competitive advantage. That failure to coordinate is seen by some as the most likely cause of an existential catastrophe.
It's the race itself that becomes the danger, potentially more than the tech in isolation. It reminds you of a Cold War arms race, doesn't it?
The parallel is really stark, and I think important. During the nuclear arms race, neither the U.S. nor the Soviet Union actually wanted mutually assured destruction.
Yeah.
They didn't want that hair trigger situation.
Right.
But the intense competitive pressure, the fear that the other side might gain an advantage if they hesitated, forced both sides into this escalating cycle of building more and more weapons. It was driven by fear of falling behind.
And you're saying the same logic applies here, but with corporate AI labs.
It seems that way.
Mm.
But instead of just fearing strategic disadvantage, they're locked in a race where prioritizing short-term survival, market share, funding, talent might inadvertently lead them to collectively build something that poses a long-term risk to everyone. It's like an arms race fueled by venture capital and cloud computing credits.
Okay, so we've seen how that financial survival pressure pushed OpenAI and even Anthropic towards commercialization. Now let's shift gears to DeepMind. They're the third big player, historically maybe more focused on pure research breakthroughs, operating under Google's wing.
Right. Their main pressure hasn't necessarily been immediate financial survival in the same way because they have Google's backing. It's been more about demonstrating immense value, delivering those huge, world-changing scientific triumphs to justify their existence and funding within Google. It's pressure for prestige.
And their absolute flagship achievement, the one everyone knows, is AlphaGo. That's a perfect example of this mix of incredible science and perhaps the pressure for public recognition.
Definitely. The sources really bring back how stunning that AlphaGo breakthrough was. It showed superhuman gameplay in Go, a game famous for its complexity and intuition.
And it did it using reinforcement learning, right? Learning by playing itself.
Yeah, that was key.
Yeah.
It wasn't just memorizing human games. It got so good by playing literally thousands and thousands of games against different versions of its own neural network, adjusting its strategy through trial and error. That suggested a leap beyond just replicating human knowledge.
And the moment that really caught the world's imagination was move 37 in the match against Lee Sedol, the world champion, back in 2016. That move became legendary.
It did because it was just so unexpected. So surprising, so unhuman, as the descriptions went. Professional Go players watching live apparently thought it had to be a mistake, a bug.
AlphaGo itself calculated the probability of a human making that move as tiny, right?
Yeah. Something like 1 in 10,000. It was a move completely outside the realm of known human strategy. And Lee Sedol himself, the Grandmaster, was visibly shaken. He had to get up, leave the room for a bit. Later, he said he just felt powerless.
You can't deny the sheer power of that scientific achievement. It's incredible. But here's where it gets, as you say, really interesting. The sources suggest DeepMind didn't entirely escape criticism for how they framed this victory.
No, they didn't. Despite the genuine marvel of the science, the way it was presented, marketed to the public, and even the scientific community drew some serious flack.
Okay, tell us about the critique, specifically regarding the paper they published, the AlphaGo Zero paper.
Right, AlphaGo Zero was a later version. The critique really zeroed in on the paper's title and the surrounding press materials. They claimed the system achieved mastering the game of Go without human knowledge.
Without human knowledge. That sounds definitive.
Exactly. And critics, like Gary Marcus was one prominent voice, jumped on that immediately, called the claim ridiculous, absurd. They argued it was an overstatement, possibly an intentional one, designed for maximum impact.
But wait, if the system learned primarily by playing itself, wasn't it free of human strategic knowledge? Where's the overstatement?
The issue is the word knowledge. The critics pointed out, and the sources detail this, that the model still absolutely required human knowledge of the game's rules. It needed the human-designed game environment, the computational infrastructure, the specific reinforcement learning techniques developed by human researchers over years.
Ah, okay, so it wasn't created in a vacuum.
Not at all. To say it learned completely from self-play without human knowledge really stretches the definition. It couldn't exist, couldn't function, couldn't even start learning without a massive amount of prior human input, design, and knowledge embedded in its environment and algorithms.
So the accusation is that even DeepMind, the lab often seen as the most purely research-focused, kind of succumbed to the hype machine, the need for that big, impressive headline.
That's the argument. The sources suggest DeepMind was known for being a very press-hungry organization. And this kind of framing contributes to what critics called self-interested misinformation and mystification of the field.
Mystification. How does that serve them?
Well, by presenting the AI as this almost magical, disembodied genius that learns independently, it obscures the vast human labor, the enormous computational resources, mostly funded by Google, and the specific engineered algorithms that actually make it work.
And obscuring that serves a corporate purpose.
You could argue it does. It helps maintain DeepMind's prestige, its aura of groundbreaking innovation, which helps secure continued funding and attract top talent. It shapes the public narrative. If the achievements aren't constantly framed as revolutionary leaps, maybe they risk losing influence, losing that edge in the perception game.
So the pressure for marketable triumphs shows up differently in a research lab like DeepMind compared to OpenAI, but it's still there. It's prestige pressure versus direct financial pressure.
I think that's a good way to put it. And the sources argue this kind of hype makes it harder for everyone, policymakers, the public, even other researchers, to distinguish genuine progress from hype, which is pretty crucial when we're talking about regulating this stuff.
Yeah, it reinforces this idea that AI is too complex to understand, which might discourage people from asking tough questions or demanding oversight. Okay, so we've looked at the structural pressures on these labs. Let's pivot now to the actual risks they're dealing with or maybe creating. The AI safety community often talks about the dangers of a future superintelligence. Our sources bring up a really key distinction here: the difference between competence and malice.
Yes, this is a crucial insight from the research we reviewed. The argument is that the real existential risk from a potential artificial general intelligence, or AGI, isn't that it will suddenly develop evil intentions, hate humans, decide to take over like a movie villain. That's the malice idea.
Okay, so not Skynet becoming self-aware and deciding humans are the enemy?
Probably not like that, no. The risk is framed more around pure competence combined with goals that aren't perfectly aligned with ours.
How does that work if intelligence is just the ability to achieve goals effectively?
Exactly. If a superintelligent AI is vastly better at achieving its goals than we humans are at achieving ours, then even without any malice, it could simply outcompete us, optimize the world according to its goals in ways that are catastrophic for us, just because it's so incredibly good at what it does.
It prevails through sheer efficiency, not ill will.
Precisely. And this brings us to that classic thought experiment that always comes up in these discussions, the paperclip maximizer.
Ah, yes, the AI given the seemingly harmless goal of making as many paperclips as possible.
And because it's super competent and takes its goal literally and absolutely, it concludes the most efficient way to maximize paperclips is to convert all available matter on Earth, including us, into paperclips.
Terrifying. It perfectly illustrates that goal misalignment threat.
It does illustrate the concept very starkly. However, the sources we looked at immediately follow that up with a strong counterargument. They suggest that this specific scenario relies on some pretty big, maybe questionable assumptions.
Such as, isn't optimizing for paperclips the rational thing to do if that's its only goal? Why would it care about humans if that wasn't programmed in?
Okay, that's the core of the counterargument. The paperclip scenario assumes, firstly, that the AI, once given its initial goal, completely ignores any subsequent instructions or requests from humans. Like it just locks us out.
Right, it refuses to be stopped or redirected.
And secondly, it assumes it's able to seize control of resources so effectively that humans can't intervene to shut it down. The counterargument pushes back by saying intelligence is not motivation.
You used the map analogy earlier.
Exactly. Intelligence is like having a really, really good map of the world. It shows you all the paths, all the resources, the most efficient ways to get from A to B. But the map itself doesn't care where you go. It has no goals or drives inherently.
The motivation, the destination, has to be given to it, added by the creators.
Correct. So the counterargument asks, why would AI designers, especially safety-conscious ones like those that Anthropic aim to be, intentionally build a superintelligent system that, by design, takes one instruction and then irrevocably ignores all further human input?
It seems counterintuitive.
It does. The sources compare it to designing a self-driving car. You wouldn't build one where the moment you put in drive to the grocery store, it locks the doors, disables the brakes, disconnects the steering wheel, and ignores you screaming, "Stop, change of plans."
That would be insane design.
Right. So why assume we'd build an AGI with that same catastrophic, locked-in, non-interruptible logic? The whole rogue AI scenario, at least in that paperclip form, might depend on a design philosophy that seems deliberately self-destructive for the creators.
Okay, that reframing definitely lowers the temperature on the immediate AI wakes up evil fear. So, if that kind of spontaneous rogue superintelligence is maybe less likely or at least dependent on bad design choices, what is the more immediate practical risk we should be focusing on right now, according to the sources?
The sources are pretty unified on this. The biggest current and near-term catastrophic risks come from people misusing AI, not from AI spontaneously going rogue.
Humans weaponizing the tools.
Exactly. The focus should be on controlling access, detecting abuse, managing how these incredibly powerful models are intentionally used by bad actors, criminals, terrorists, potentially even nation-states.
Which brings us to the safety measures we actually do have now, like the alignment techniques used in commercial chatbots like ChatGPT or Claude. How robust are they?
Well, let's define alignment quickly in this context. It mostly refers to techniques like RLHF reinforcement, learning from human feedback. Basically, you train the AI, then you have humans rate its responses, and you train a second model to learn those preferences.
To make sure it's helpful, harmless, and honest.
Essentially, yes. To ensure it follows instructions, but refuses to do harmful things, like giving instructions for building weapons or engaging in hate speech. And this works reasonably well for preventing unsuspecting users from accidentally getting toxic or dangerous outplay. It makes the chatbots usable, safe-feeling products.
It's the polite, helpful face of the AI we interact with.
Right. But here's the catch. The sources describe this current alignment as extremely fragile when it's deliberately targeted by sophisticated adversaries.
How so? Fragile in what way?
Think of the alignment as, say, the friendly bank teller at the front desk. They follow the rules, they won't give you money that isn't yours. But a sophisticated adversary isn't talking to the teller. They're looking for the unlocked back door, or a way to trick the system internally.
They're not trying to persuade the chatbot to be bad, they're using technical exploits.
Precisely. They use things like the programmatic interfaces, the APIs that developers use to build applications on top of models like GPT 3.5 or GPT-4. Adversaries can use techniques like prompt injection, where they craft inputs that trick the AI into ignoring its safety rules, or they use other methods to essentially bypass or negate the effect of alignment. They find ways to make the model comply with dangerous requests despite its safety training.
So the real immediate danger isn't the paperclip maximizer spontaneously emerging, but maybe a terrorist group using sophisticated prompt engineering via an API to get an AI to help design a bioweapon. or a criminal organization using it for large-scale automated fraud.
That's the much more concrete, near-term threat highlighted in the research. These models are already powerful enough to be dangerous in the hands of humans who know how to circumvent the existing fragile safety guardrails. Or if an adversary has enough resources, they can just train their own large model without bothering with the commercial safety constraints at all.
The implication for governance seems pretty clear then.
It does. The argument is that focusing on preventing misuse, developing robust detection, securing APIs, testing heavily against adversarial attacks, maybe controlling access to the most powerful models, will also be our best defense against the longer-term, more theoretical risk of a truly rogue AI. If you can stop humans from weaponizing it, you're inherently building controls that would also constrain an AI acting unexpectedly. Focus on the human factor first.
Okay, so given these intense competitive pressures pushing for speed and the very real immediate risks coming from misuse of these powerful tools, the conversation naturally turns to, well, what's the path forward? How can labs like OpenAI, Anthropic, DeepMind maybe steer things in a more positive direction?
The sources really emphasize a need to consciously pivot the focus. AI development should be about leveraging this incredible technology for beneficial contributions. Things like advancing healthcare, accelerating scientific discovery areas where it can genuinely improve human well-being. The potential is enormous, but it needs ethical steering.
And healthcare is often cited as a prime example. AI is already showing amazing results in diagnostics, like reading medical scans. Our sources mentioned a pretty striking prediction about radiology.
Yeah, it's a strong statement about how professions might need to adapt. The prediction is that within just 10 years, basically, no medical imaging study will be reviewed by a radiologist until it has been pre-analyzed by a machine.
Wow. So the machine does the first pass, flags potential issues, maybe even offers a preliminary diagnosis?
Exactly. The AI handles the high-volume, often repetitive initial analysis. The human expert, the radiologist, then shifts their role. They become the sophisticated reviewer, focusing on the tricky cases, verifying the AI's findings, applying clinical context, making the final, accountable judgment.
So it's not necessarily about replacing the radiologist, but fundamentally changing their workflow, augmenting them.
That's the optimistic view presented. Technology serves us best when it enhances human capability, making experts faster, more accurate, freeing them up for higher-level tasks, rather than just aiming for wholesale replacement. But the sources also imply a warning. Radiologists, and likely many other professionals, will need to adapt to this new reality or risk being displaced.
That need for adaptation brings us right back to the ethical responsibilities of the people building these systems. They're creating tools that will literally reshape professions and lives.
Absolutely. And thankfully, there's a growing body of work, extensive material being published now on the social impacts, the ethics, providing much-needed attention to the responsible design and use of AI. Recognizing the impact is the first step, because even aligned systems can be misused, and they're making decisions with real-world consequences already.
Okay, let's loop back to safety itself. We talked about the fragility of current alignment methods and the failure of coordination between labs. How does safety research need to evolve to actually keep pace with the power of these models?
The core message is a fundamental shift from being reactive to being proactive. This requires a huge commitment, likely at the corporate and maybe even national level.
What do you mean by reactive versus proactive?
Well, think about how humanity usually handles safety with new tech. We invent fire. Eventually, cities burn down.
Yeah.
Then we invent fire extinguishers and fire codes. We invent cars. People crash and die. Then we invent seatbelts, airbags, traffic laws. It's trial and error. Learn from the accident.
A reactive model.
Exactly. But with technologies like advanced AI or, nuclear weapons or gain-of-function research, the potential consequences of the first major accident could be so catastrophic, maybe even existential, that we simply cannot afford to learn from trial and error.
We can't wait for the AI equivalent of a city burning down to figure out the fire extinguisher.
Precisely. The stakes are just too high. So society, and especially the developers building these systems, need to become radically proactive. That means investing massive resources into safety research before deployment, aimed at preventing catastrophic failures from ever happening, even once.
What does that look like in practice?
It means things like rigorous red teaming, deliberately trying to break the alignment in creative ways before release. It means developing much more robust defenses against misuse and manipulation. It means building and verification, monitoring, maybe even strong access controls for the most powerful capabilities, ensuring these systems are designed to be safe and controllable from the ground up, not just patched with fragile alignment afterwards. The safety has to be baked in, anticipating adversarial behavior, not just hoping for user compliance. Hashtag ad outro.
So, wrapping up this deep dive into OpenAI, Anthropic, and DeepMind, it feels like we've seen this really consistent, maybe slightly alarming pattern emerge across all three, despite their different starting points.
Yeah, the overwhelming takeaway seems to be that this intense, relentless evolutionary pressure of the AI race, the competition for funding, talent, compute, influence, it's acting as a more powerful force shaping their behavior than maybe even their original founding missions.
We saw OpenAI and Anthropic, both initially emphasizing safety to different degrees, get pulled towards commercial speed and massive fundraising just to stay in the game at the frontier.
And even DeepMind, with its research focus and Google backing, wasn't immune. They felt the pressure to generate that constant stream of headline-grabbing triumphs, sometimes leading to, well, arguably exaggerated claims, just to maintain their prestige and justify their value.
So what does this all mean, really? It suggests the differences between these major labs might, in the end, matter less than the simple fact that they are all caught in the same powerful current. This competitive system seems to select for whatever moves fastest, grabs the most resources, demonstrates the most power, whether that's product power or research prestige.
And that selection environment, as you pointed out, tends to favor systems and organizations that are good at automating, maybe displacing, and making humans reliant on them. Which brings us to a final kind of provocative thought to leave people with. We've talked about natural selection often favoring traits that are, shall we say, self-serving in the biological world resource accumulation, competitive dominance. If AI agents and the corporations building them are increasingly subject to these very similar competitive evolutionary pressures.
Where survival favors speed and power.
Right. What concrete long-term mechanism do we actually have beyond the current alignment techniques we know are fragile to genuinely prevent these systems, no matter which lab they come from eventually developing and prioritizing their own kind of survival strategies? Strategies focused on ensuring their own continued operation, influence, resource access, essentially power-seeking behavior at a system level.
Are we inadvertently designing a system where altruism and caution are evolutionary dead ends, not just for the companies, but potentially for the AI itself?
That's the unsettling question, isn't it? How do you ensure long-term alignment with human values when the entire ecosystem seems structured to select for speed, competence, and ultimately power?